I love home theater receivers. For most people, a home theater receiver is more than enough to give them a good surround sound experience. Aside from sound bars, more home theaters nowadays are driven by a receiver than they are separate components. But not every home theater receiver is going to be perfect for that enthusiast who's looking for something a little bit more high-end. But we have the receiver for that today because we are talking about Yamaha's flagship RX-A3080 Aventage receiver. So go ahead, hit that like button, subscribe if you're not already, because we're about to get into it. So I just want to give a quick shout out to today's sponsor, Adorama. They helped us out and helped us to get a hold of something we've been dying to have on this channel, and they sent us the Yamaha receiver we're talking about today. So thank you to Adorama for that. And if you thought Adorama was just for photographers, they're not. They have a ton of home audio and home theater goods. Be sure to check out their link in the description below, and thank you again to Adorama for sponsoring this episode. There's no shortage of AV receivers on the market right now, and they range in price from a few $100s all the way up to thousands. And it isn't so much the features that dictate the price of a receiver, because you can find a cheap receiver that has 4K, even 8K capability, let alone Dolby Atmos. No, what sets the price, or what drives the price up on a home theater receiver, is the quality of the amplifiers found within and the number of channels or speakers those amps are capable of driving. The aim of any home theater receiver is to simplify the control of your home theater as well as power your surround sound speakers. And for the most part, most AV receivers get this right. Though there are some receivers that are clearly aimed at a more entry-level audience, and they simplify what is a potentially complicated process down to its bare essentials. Case in point, our Sony DN1080 receiver, which we've reviewed on this channel. It takes a complicated topic like home theater and makes it approachable. But on the flip side, we have the Yamaha that we're looking at today, which is tailor-made for enthusiasts, allowing them to customize it to their heart's content. And in doing so, it reacts much more like a pair of dedicated home theater separate components, all the while sounding pretty good in the process. We're going to take a little bit more of a bird's eye view on this particular receiver because the Yamaha's feature set is that vast. Not to mention the way I set it up may not be identical to how you will set it up. But by the end of this review, it is my goal that you will understand kind of what it sounds like, what its tendencies are, what it is like to live with day to day, as well as a few things you might want to look out for. So let's kick things off with the specs. Right off the bat, the first thing that I noticed about the Yamaha was its size and weight. This is not your standard receiver. In fact, it's built to a standard that you'll find on a lot more high-end components. That being said, you're going to want to make sure that your rack is capable of supporting its weight as well as accommodating its depth. I actually had to remove the back panel on one side of the BDI octave cabinet in order to accommodate the Yamaha, which was surprising because pretty much everything fits in the BDI octave. Thankfully, installing the Yamaha was no different than any other receiver, and there's plenty of real estate on the back panel to make all of your necessary connections. I was pleasantly surprised to see a host of legacy input options on the Yamaha, as a lot of modern receivers forego things like composite and component video inputs in an attempt to save space and money. Speaking of inputs, I am pleased to see that Yamaha has included a very capable phono preamp here, as well as a pair of balanced analog inputs. Now, in terms of HDMI, there are a ton of HDMI inputs and outputs. There's actually 3 HDMI outputs on this receiver, and all of the HDMI inputs and outputs are capable of 4K 60 at 444. And legacy video signals are upscaled to that standard via HDMI. Now, there is ARC as well as eARC, though you may have to run a firmware update in order to get eARC out of the box. And this is also HDR compatible with HDR10, HLG, as well as Dolby Vision. So while the Yamaha may not be on the bleeding edge of video technology with 8K, it has more than enough to keep you happy with 4K for the foreseeable future. When looking at a receiver in this price range, it should have some measure of upgradability, and the Yamaha does. In fact, it has preamp outputs for all 11 of its channels, including both subwoofers. There's even a pair of balanced preamp outputs that you can use to drive an amp to power your left and right main speakers. And if you use the preamp outputs, you're effectively turning the Yamaha into a preamp processor, and you're bypassing its internal amps altogether. Or of course, you can mix and match for something a little more custom. Now, Yamaha states that the power output of this receiver is 165 watts per channel, but it immediately throws some cold water on those claims, rating it at 150 watts per channel into 8 ohms in more real-world scenarios, but again, only 2 channels driven. We don't actually know what the all channels driven power output of this receiver is. Suffice to say, we know it ain't no 165 watts. The amplifier inside the Yamaha exhibits great control over virtually any loudspeaker that we connected to it, be it for home theater or 2-channel use. For home theater use, we primarily relied on our Yamaha HCS speaker system. We also used the ELAC debut reference as well as the SVS Prime satellite speaker system, both of which I have just reviewed on this channel, and links will be in the description below. And for 2-channel listening, we relied on the Q Acoustics Concept 300 monitor speakers, which are coming soon. So the Yamaha's overall sound signature isn't so much a signature as it is a tendency for control, almost absolute control. This is not a receiver that I would dub as lively or forward, nor would I say that it is warm or lush. It actually falls somewhere in the middle, and you might be thinking to yourself, well, that makes it neutral. Well, maybe it is. It may be one of the more neutral receivers that I've encountered, as it falls somewhere in between sort of the round, lush tones of Denon and Marantz, while being nowhere near as excitable as Sony's crop of receivers. As a result, the sound experience from the Yamaha is going to be far more impacted by your choice of connected loudspeakers. That and whether or not you choose to use Yamaha's room correction software, which I'm going to be honest with you is fantastic. Yamaha's room correction software goes a step further by not only allowing you to measure multiple areas within your room, but also multiple dimensions. This is something that high-end home theater processors are currently playing with, but that a lot of budget receivers just outright lack. It even has a manual parametric EQ for all of its channels for those of you that may want to use third-party software like Room EQ Wizard. Yeah, like I said, custom. In truth, you can scale this beast from a simple 5.1 home theater system to arguably a no-holds-barred Dolby Atmos setup relatively easily, and the experience that you're going to have throughout is going to be epic. Because bass is deep and tight, the mids are clear and intelligible, and high frequencies are incredibly airy without a trace of glare. And depending on your loudspeakers, the dynamics can be rather explosive. Now, I had no problems recreating a cinema-like experience with my Yamaha home theater system, and I only had to turn the volume up ever so slightly in order to get the ELACs to follow suit. So while the actual amplifier power ratings on this Yamaha may not be up to the manufacturer's claims, this is not a receiver that seems light on juice. And there's just one more thing that I want to point out about the Yamaha's performance that I found incredibly useful. Because it can connect to popular music streaming services like Tidal and Spotify natively, it makes things like ancillary or third-party music streamers, heck, maybe even disc players altogether, a bit unnecessary. And the Yamaha Control app, which you can download from the iOS or Google Play Store, is fantastic. It's borderline name-like, and I don't say that a lot about a lot of apps that we come across, and yet the Yamaha I found to be exemplary. So before you go clicking down below thinking this is the perfect receiver for you, there are a couple of things that you need to be aware of. My first comment will likely not be seen as a negative by everybody, but if you're just getting started in home theater, this receiver is not for beginners. If you are a beginner, everything about the Yamaha is probably overkill. Can it do everything short of make you dinner? Sure. You just got to be willing to work for it. Which brings me to the menus. They're not the most centrally located or intelligible, and if I'm being honest, they do lack a certain sophistication in the graphics department. Still, learn them inside and out, and you will have a measure of customization within the Yamaha that few, if any, receivers on the market right now can match. Now, Yamaha is a company that has always prided itself on its virtual surround sound and DSP capabilities, and they are on full effect here. And to be honest with you, I find most of them gimmicky at best, though there were a few that I welcomed. But you may find yourself flipping through virtual pages of presets when really all you ever wanted was maybe stereo or simple surround sound decoding. Now, it should be noted that you can turn these presets off or disable the ones you don't want to see. But once again, you have to know which menu and where to go and do that and how. Now, you guys know that I am a stickler about remotes, and I especially like a good remote. And the Yamaha's remote is good. It's very well built, if not a little bit daunting, as there are so many buttons because, well, it enables so much control. Now, I did find that once I had the Yamaha set up the way I wanted to, I started to rely a lot more on the Control app, which put my music streaming at my fingertips, which is handy. But the app is a supplement to the remote, and so you never can use one completely over the other. So as daunting as the Yamaha's remote may be, you're going to have to learn it. And I'm just going to keep saying it. The Yamaha is a receiver that you are going to have to devote some serious time into learning. Thankfully, it sounds so good out of the box that as you learn it, and by the time you know it inside and out, you'll be even more thrilled. Now, in terms of competition, obviously we compared the Yamaha to our Sony 1080 receiver, and the Yamaha bested the Sony in every conceivable way, save for maybe menus and setup. But again, the Sony's around a $500 receiver, whereas the Yamaha is just a hair under $2,000, and so I expected this result. And of course, you can get one of Yamaha's lesser Aventage model, either the 2080 or 1080. Both should give you about the same measure of control. They'll just be lacking in power and number of channels, and I will link to both of those options down in the description below. Now, we took delivery of one of Denon's brand new 8K receivers just before going live with this review, so we didn't get a chance to test it against the Yamaha. And so if you're worried at all about future-proofing your system and 8K, then you probably should consider the Denon or Marantz models, but understand that we are still very much in a 4K present, and in that present day, the Yamaha is still a killer receiver. So to wrap it up, the Yamaha A3080 is one of the finer home theater receivers on the market right now. It is clearly aimed at a more advanced enthusiast, maybe someone with a more complex system and who isn't afraid to dive into the menus and make their experience a little bit more custom. Do I think it's worth its asking price? Absolutely. In fact, I think it's worth considering over some home theater separates. It's that good. In fact, I'm sad because I now have to send it back. So Yamaha, if you're watching, call me. I want one. So that's it. That is my review of Yamaha's flagship Aventage receiver. Let me know what you guys think down in the comments below. And while you're down there, I have a question for you. What do you look for when shopping for a home theater receiver? Let me know. If you like this video, please do give it a thumbs up, like, and subscribe. Ring the bell so that you are notified when new videos drop. If you use any of the links that we use down below, know that you are supporting this channel and that we thank you very much. If you're looking for another way to support this channel, consider becoming a member. You can click join right down there by subscribe, read all about that. Follow me on Instagram at Recovering Audiophile, and that's it. So remember, the only person that has to like the sound of your system is you. So happy listening, everybody. Thank you so much for watching, and we will see you on the next video. Bye.
Okay, I think.
Oh, what? That was right.
It was right.
That was so good. We're done.
We can be done, but I want to make a note.
For there really isn't much that the Yamaha can't do while sounding.
Yeah.
Yeah, who cares? What am I doing?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. And accommodate its depth. I actually had to remove the back panel on our BDI octave. Oh.
Yeah. What the?
It doesn't stay on forever.
I don't know.